All right, welcome to Hyperborean Radio. I'm Celtic God. The Lore Keeper's here with me as always. And welcome to a little island of sanity in an insane world. I hope everybody's doing all right out there.
Yes, and welcome to Hyperborean Radio, you dirty heathens.
Oh, before we really get going, though, I do want to thank all of our haters out there, as well as all of our Patreons and people that buy our shirts and whatnot, because you guys really help a lot, including the people that share us.
Yes.
Because it does help us keep from falling so dramatically, because we've noticed whenever we say things that...
We say the no-no thing.
Yeah, we say the no-no things, and then we dribble off, but people then share us, and we dribble back up. So, yeah, I guess, thank everybody.
Well, and today's topic is actually something we've been bouncing back and forth with for a while, is the sacred act of storytelling. And we've said it before, and I'll say it again, and I want to make this very clear. The sacred thing is not the story, because every story, no matter how sacred you might consider it, shifts. It's got bones, but the meat is very easily changeable. You can even rearrange the bones if you want. And the story...
Well, you think of it like canon.
Yeah.
Like, you can change the details of the story, and it doesn't matter, but the canon is the canon. Don't touch the fucking canon.
Yes.
So the universe has to stay the same. Captain America always has to be Captain America. Spike always has to be Spike, but you can take Spike and have him do different things, and that's just fine.
Yeah. It's like Spider-Man. You can mess with him a little bit, but he's got to still be Spider-Man.
Yeah. He has to have Uncle Ben.
Oliver Twist, Sherlock Holmes,
Yeah.
Pinocchio, all those characters. And then the storyteller isn't the sacred part. We have famous storytellers, but if you've ever paid attention to how people view things, you can have the most famous story series in the world that you've either directed or created. One flop, and pretty much you're on thin ice. And that's if it doesn't completely
You're
destroy
on
your
notice, mister.
Pretty much. I mean, it's like movie makers, directors, producers, whatever. You can have just a line of hits of amazing stories, but then you hit that one point and it crumbles. And it's because our people are storytellers. We teach our culture, we teach our customs, we teach our legends,
Morals,
our history, everything with stories. People have missed the point with the stories.
The sacred act of storytelling.
Yes.
And it really is. It's a point that a lot of people miss. I imagine, like usual, because I love our analytics now, especially once I got smart enough to share it on Telegram, because you can see the people that they hear the intro, like the radio turning on and the static, and they're gone and they never come back. Other people, they hear our voice. Hello, welcome to Hyperborean Radio, and they're like, "Oh, I can't take this," and then they bail. They hear what the topic is, the opening statements, and they're like, "Oh, I can't handle this," and they bail. And now I enjoy watching all of those drop off. For the good news is we're up from 53% overall retention,
70% retention.
Yeah, you guys are getting tougher. It's getting harder and harder to chase everybody away. I mean, I'm just giddy.
Well, and the reason the storytelling is actually the most important bit, not the story itself or the storyteller, is you can tell any number of stories to get your point across, to tell what you want to tell.
Well, and you have a personal experience with this. I mean, I've done this a lot, but you was so excited the other day because you actually took advantage of an opportunity, and then it cemented this for you.
Yeah, well, I was at work, and I was talking to a coworker while we were working, and basically the conversation fell to like paganism and gods, and I started telling him about the gods, but I actually described them like they were figures. And basically I was telling him like Othin, for instance.
You was describing who they were.
Who they were, not what. Like, I didn't describe Othin as a one-eyed, wandering, all-powerful wizard, a ball-father, whatever. No, I described him as what he is. He's a ruthless beggar king, wandering magical hobo with a little bit of murdery.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, I like him because he's interesting. And then I eventually got into the Morrigan. I described, like, she is almost exclusively venerated by males. She is that primal feminine. I started describing her, like how she looked, how she
like who
acts.
she is.
Yes. I described, like, he got very interested when I started explaining, like, the only females that could really venerate the Morrigan are, like, the pirate queen, Grace O'Malley.
Right. And I know that there's a bunch of Wiccans right now. Half of them clicked off. The other half are waiting to get offended. Because Well, I worship the Morgan. This is what the Morgan does to, let's say, normal females. She drives them insane. Now look at most of your Wiccans that venerate the Morgan. They're insane.
Yes, she drives them mad. She drives them over cliffs. She sicks her ravens and her wolves.
She takes their men away from them. She keeps other men from going to them.
She skins them.
Yeah.
Flays them.
She lays them bare to the point where they can't deny it to themselves, and drives them mad and eventually to death. Now look at most of the females out there that venerate the Morgan.
Well, and then he started doing things, the guy I was talking to, unprompted. Like, he would agree, like, Othin was far more interesting than how most people talk about him.
Mm-hmm.
Or the Morgan, he actually described that. Yeah.
Well, and he actually got excited, right?
Oh, yeah. Like, when I started describing the Dogda, I said, he's basically Hagrid, the god. And he actually got excited then, and I started describing him like, the Dogda is incredibly generous. He will pretty much.
Well, and the reason why you use Hagrid is because that's his physical description.
Physical description, and not too often the personality department.
Yes,
not too off. And of course I edited it slightly, like he's not an exact thing, but then I started going into like,
which is a good way to describe it. You're like, it's not one for one, but. Well, you could see the echoes there, and then you go into the echoes.
Well, yeah, and I tried to do the same thing with the Morgan by using the Galadriel, All Shall Love Me, and Despair scene, but he's like the one adult human being that hasn't seen The Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
And then when I was getting into the Dogda, I told him like the story of you can't leave him without having a pocket full of beer. And of course he had the question like, a pocket full of beer? You mean like there's just like beer poured in your pockets?
I don't know.
I'm like, I don't know. Like, I think he puts like a flask or a bottle or like a bottle with, or like a clay jug with 3 X's. I don't know. and I actually started
you figure it out. Let me know. But it sounds cool as shit.
Well, and I would go into him. And he got so excited because I started describing how generous he is and that he'll pretty much give you the shirt off his back. And he's this humongous, burly guy, and he can turn into a giant. And but when he shifts back into human, he has trouble with his dick. So he's got like an 8-foot dick on a human body. He just started kind of laughing.
Which is, of course, the extreme end.
Yeah, it's the irreverence that you find
right.
in our... And people like it because he started smiling. And I told him about the Dogda and how... if you do betray him, he gives you a fate worse than death. And I told him that he basically you get used as bungholes.
Well, no, you get driven into a bunghole, so you described it wrong.
No, I described
you
it
are the bung driven into the
yeah,
bunghole.
That's what I described. You are used as the bunghole plug.
Yes.
And it was actually interesting because before I even described the fate worse than death that would befall someone, he actually said, when I said if someone betrays him, there's a fate worse than death, he's like, why would anyone betray him? He sounds like the nicest guy. Like, unprompted, just started saying that. And then he started asking questions, like when I said you get used as a bunghole plug. He's like, do you go in like head first or foot first? And I'm like, I'm guessing it's dealer's choice. So there's all these questions that come with the telling of the story.
It just depends on how he grabs you, bro.
Yeah.
If you tried running, you're probably going in foot first. Maybe.
But it was fun because it's not just telling the stories and seeing their faces light up, but it's also
Isn't it cool too how it's almost like they're remembering something that they didn't know that they forgot?
Yeah, that's what it is.
But it only works when you do it that way. If you take the academic approach and the religious approach, you don't get that response.
Well, it's because is like we've posted before and we've talked about, there is no name for it because it's just who we are. However, there is a caveat to that. It's mutually exclusive.
Mm-hmm.
If you join another religion, it's kind of like throwing away what you are. Like, you can't be Christian and pagan.
No,
There's
just
no
doesn't
such
work
thing
that
as
way.
a Christian witch. There's no such thing as a Christian ethnic faith. It just doesn't work.
Yeah. It's crazy. Well, and I've done very similar things, and for me, like, sometimes I'll work in stories, and one of my favorite ones, it's the story of Tyr on the Tree of Pain, and I'll actually mime it so I get all really traditional with it, and it's the most amazing thing because I can watch their eyes. They stop actually watching me, and they lean in very intent, listening to everything, all the tones, all the everything, and breathing in the story. And then they go somewhere else. And then when I stop telling the story, watch them snap back. And yeah, I've had big men actually start tearing up just due to the intensity of the story. And it's an amazing thing. And it takes that honesty, the honesty of storytelling.
Well, you have to mean it. It's the same issue that, like we've talked about this before, is our art. Art of the gods nowadays typically trends more towards fantasy.
Yeah.
It's like people are just drawing something they think is neat, like Dragon or Lord of the Rings.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, there's usually more emotion in the Lord of the Rings because people are attached to the story of Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings is one of those modern surrogate mythologies, but really it's a...
Well, and here's the thing, is that's not blasphemy. That's what they were written for.
Well, they are... it was... Unlike a lot of surrogate mythologies, Lord of the Rings was deliberately written to give the English a mythology.
Yes.
And it's largely based off... Specifically,
a lot of people will say that it's based off from the Germanic and Scandinavian, but it's not if you listen to the fucking author himself.
Oh, it's heavily based on the Celts. It has influence from the
did
Slavs,
reference
the Greeks, the Romans,
he did
the
reference
Finns.
Other tribes, but the core of the story is their Celtic stories. He said so himself.
Yes, there are elements of the Germanic, but it's like the elves. A lot of people's idea of elves is more like a weird bent twisting of Fae.
The Lord of the Ring elves are actually, the Fae.
They're closer to the Fae.
And specifically the Faerie.
Yeah, the Faerie, which are the nobility of the Fae.
Yes.
Well, and they even end up in a different realm by the end. So it's like, it's pretty obvious he's kind of referencing the Tuatha Danann story there. But that's the thing, is all of our stories, like we covered this in media, the modern media, books, comic books, television, it's all a continuation of the oral tradition. The only difference now is the oral tradition has been severed for many people.
Well, and I've taken some people before that were Christians, like they actively went to church and participated in all the church stuff. And every now and then you end up with that one that is genuinely curious. And of course, their ulterior motive is to, what's that word where they
convert you?
Yeah, to convert you. But then I describe paganism, the ethnic faith, the same way that we always describe it. And then I start, what about the gods and this and that? So then I give them the basic rundown is the gods are us and we are the gods. They're an extension of us as we are an extension of them, much the same way as you're an extension of your great-grandparents.
Well, that's actually how I described it with the guy I was talking to. I said, we are descended of the gods, body and soul. Like
yes,
flesh.
We are actually related to them. These are our ancestors.
Both in flesh and in spirit.
Right.
We are literally descended in every way from them.
Right, but then they want to talk about the gods because you can see it on their faces. They're just waiting to talk about power levels and scales. But rather than taking the same route that everybody else does, like let's use Odin because he's the one that's used the most, and people get dry and academic, and then they try power scaling him right up to compete directly with the power of Yahweh, the perceived power of Yahweh or some shit. And then they're trying to have a dick measuring contest. I don't even go that route. I describe them as who they are and why they are so important to us. And I'll even work in your God. Sure, I believe your God exists. I just think he's a liar and I don't care and he doesn't matter. And then I prove to them he doesn't matter.
No, and most Christians don't even.
And the way that I prove
matters.
it is by the way I talk about our gods. Their God doesn't have any place in these stories, and it doesn't. He just loses all importance because of the importance placed on our gods, and it's not because they're powerful and they're separate of us, and we're striving to. No. I talk about them like a friend.
Like a family member,
yes.
a great hero.
I talk about them like they're people, and they just become so wistful. And oh wow, if more pagans was like you, I would do that. If there was an actual community of pagans that I could join, which makes me kind of sad because if everybody that said that would have stuck around,
you would already have one.
Fuck, we'd have a community of 300-400 people because I don't have these conversations, once every 10 years. I have them quite frequently, actually.
The thing is, Christians never tell stories about Yahweh, which is probably why he's so unimportant in reality, and why they.
Well, their stories suck, which is why we aren't really going to talk about
that
part of it. Just a reference, just for the counterbalance, I guess.
Well, and the other thing is like the same guy I was talking to at work. I told him the truth, which is in European myths, there are kings of the gods and there are creation myths. These are symbolic. They change with time period. They change with hierarchy, cultural milieu, religious and political orientations. In the end, they don't matter.
Well, and every one of our goddess isn't really a thing. It's male or female. It's a god. Our gods, they're all kings. Every one of them.
They're all chieftains of some tribe.
Yes.
Of someone's every god is someone's chieftain, which is why it's kind of pointless to have the king of the gods or the chieftain of the gods or whatever. And that's the thing. Is it's not that these don't matter completely, but for any god that's placed in that role as creator or king, this is a very specific tradition and it is irrelevant to the broader lore.
Mm-hmm.
Because like Hala, for instance, Hala is also credited with the creation of, humans and tribes and whatever. Just
there's a lot
Odin.
of gods credited with that.
Oh, yeah, and it changes depending on region. And that's the version in Hesh. Here's the thing, though. Hala is way more interesting. That is a footnote. That is a footnote from a specific tribal tradition.
Mm-hmm. The far more important lesson to take away from Hala. Potato dumplings.
Oh, yeah.
Pancakes. You got to throw the pancakes.
Well, I started telling him about Hala, too, and I told him one of my favorite stories of Hala, which is she's going around as an old lady like she likes to, and someone gives her free wine to try out. She drinks it, says thank you, gives it right back, walks away, thinks in her head that was some of the worst wine I've ever had in my entire life, sends a frost to kill all the vineyards in the area, not just the one the wine came from, all the vineyards.
All of them.
Because how dare that entire region make bad wine and give it to me? And then she's kind of like, I kind of fucked over an entire region. So I'm gonna make this up to them. So then she goes down as a pretty maid, which is her other favorite form. She usually goes as old lady, hot blonde. That's kind of her two forms. So then she goes as the pretty maiden and starts cooking, and people smell it, and it's like, oh, that smells so good. What is it? And they go over, and she's making potato dumplings. And then the region began to grow potatoes, and they eat potato dumplings to this day.
Yeah, and it's a wonderful story, and that's the important part. It's the sacred. It's not the story. I mean, the stories they need to be told in a cool way so that people like them. But here's part of that sacred act of the storytelling. It's not just repeating the story. You have to actually care. It's like another topic that we've been talking about with music. You have to care.
Well,
you have to understand. You can't just. You can do everything technically perfect, but it just rings hollow if you don't actually care.
Well, it's like if you commit an epic to memory, but then you never tell it or perform it. What was the point?
Or if you perform it robotically, I guess you're just going through the motions. People can tell.
Well, I think this is partly why when you're depicting our gods, at least depicting them literally, like trying to depict them in a scene, some of the best artists I've seen are like our friend Aethelwolf, Seb McKinnon, Herman Hendrick, Mr. Werewolf.
Yeah, where they don't get overly detailed with it.
It's almost the concept art level dreamy surrealness.
Yes.
And that, I think that's partially because of our storytelling method. Because what we would do, and we still do it to this day, is
the idea is that you can see the god in not only yourself, but also in the people around you, your friend, your lover, your uncle, your whatever. Hopefully all those things aren't wrapped up in one. Sorry, the reverent side came out. So I guess I'm not really sorry. But yeah, it's so that you can see the gods in the world around you.
Well, precisely. And that's why, like, you'd get the fire, and then anyone who's been near a big fire, whoever is near it between you and the fire, they're completely draped in shadow. So you can do all of this
shadow puppetry.
Shadow puppetry. Two sticks become antlers because you just see it, or you mime the hitting of an anvil when you're trying to do it, and you make the noises and all that other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes the story alive.
Right. Well, because I've seen that in your eyes as well. And I've told that same story with Thor striking the anvil for, I couldn't even tell you how many people. And they always have the same reaction. The eyes get wide like, wow, because I actually raise myself right up on my toes. Arm as high up over my head as I can get it with it crooked like I'm holding a heavy hammer. And I swing down as hard as I can as I count. Once, twice, thrice. And the eyes are always the same.
Well, I think one of the reasons Thor is such an appealing god is he's very innocent.
Mm-hmm.
Because he is,
But
whatever he is, he is
what I was just
honest
talking about
it.
though is the audience. So the person that I'm talking to, or the people that I'm talking to when I tell that story, the expression is always the same. Not just the eyes being wide, but wonder written all over their face. Like they're not actually watching me; they're watching Thor.
Yeah. Well, it's like, the thing is, stories, even in the modern day, that a lot of people can miss the point. Like we were talking before about South Park and The Simpsons. And
Oh,
how
I
a
thought
lot
you
of
was
people
going to go
meant-
with the blue curtain thing.
Oh yeah, the English teacher meme. What the English teacher says the blue curtains mean. They symbolize the creeping depression which is overcome and overtaken his life that he must rise above. What the author meant, the curtains were fucking blue.
Yeah.
But no, it's like we were talking about South Park and how it's effectively a story of Butters and Kenny. These two opposite ends. Kenny is hyper aware that the world is shit, and Butters is completely unaware that the world is shit.
You're a fan of at least the old South Park, and to me, I knew what it was. I'm not really a fan, but I've watched enough of it to realize this is actually a story about Kenny and Butters. The other characters are there to support Kenny and Butters, and then I had to explain it to you, and then you're like, oh.
Well, and the weird thing is the
that's
first
true.
few seasons don't do that, but when the show actually starts getting good is when Butters and Kenny start getting a bit more of a broader, like when they were just pulling.
And they still, on the surface, don't appear to be main characters on the surface.
But the best episodes are with those two characters.
Right.
Cartman is an easy third, but Cartman is Cartman.
Or like another one where people miss the obvious. You ask most people, what is The Simpsons about? And they'll give you Bart.
Lisa, the Simpsons family.
I don't
just
know
in
why I was
general.
going to call her Sally. I don't watch most of these shows. But The Simpsons itself is actually a love story between Marge and Homer.
Which is why the worst episodes are when they try to force this conflict between the two characters. It doesn't work because these two characters love each other so much, and anyone who's a fan of the show knows that. Like one of the things that, because I used to be a really big Simpsons fan, I've dropped off. But in The Simpsons, one of my favorite scenes in the entire show is Homer's he's twirling this gun around because he's kind of become like a random gun nut. It's not the best episode.
Anyways.
But he's goes into the Quickie Mart, and Apu's like, oh, don't shoot. And he's like, well, I'm not going to rob the Quickie Mart. And he's like, oh, wait, what would my life be like if I robbed the Quickie Mart? So then he thinks in his head, and he's thinking, he has this giant mansion. There's like a big band music playing, and he's like twirling around the gun with a cigar and a top hat, dressed really rich. And he's got a go-go girl right next to him dancing. It's Marge. Homer is so in love with Marge that even in a perfect fantasy world delusion, he can't think of any woman he'd rather have by his side than Marge.
Yeah, and it kind of goes the other way, too, where although she will imagine other men, but then the dream quickly falls apart and turns into crap, and then she realizes how much she loves
Oh,
Homer.
yeah, they're completely devoted to each other. It's partly why the show is so likable, is those two characters specifically.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think a lot of people, what it is, and it's the same thing dealing with many different topics, but they get so close, they can't see the forest for the trees. They get so close and so focused in on, say, the oak tree, they don't notice the beech and the maple and the jack pines and the spruces in the forest as well. They proudly declare this is an oak forest when there's many kinds of different tree in that forest, but they will swear up and down it's an oak forest. No, it's a forest that has oak in it. It is not an oak forest.
Well, it's like I've been saying for a while. The stories have to continue to be told. That's why the storytelling is the sacred part.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter if all the stories were written down. If we don't continue to tell them, they will die.
Yeah. Well, and it's also part of why conflation is such an issue. When in doubt, separate it out.
Yeah, that's the method I did. When I realized that there was nothing backing up besides very faulty etymology, that Wotan, the forest mountain god of fury, and Othin, the beggar king, were the same god.
Creating Odin.
Yeah, I separated them both out, and they make more sense that way.
Mm-hmm.
If someone has proof they're the same, other than but the etymology says, because
But all the experts say, because I don't care.
the
As
experts
a matter
also
of fact,
claim that
today-
our race is a genetic disease. So.
Today, which is we're recording on what is today, Sunday. So if you follow our podcast, or our Telegram. Obviously, if you're listening, you follow the podcast. If you follow our Telegram, go back to Sunday, and you will see a post on, what's the name of that idol?
Shigir idol.
Yes, the Shigir idol. The experts claim this is an idol, like a totem pole. However, I presented using all of the pieces because for them to turn it into a totem pole, the experts have to ignore certain pieces of the pole because it just doesn't fit and it changes its shape.
It's pretty obviously...
it's a boat.
Yes.
And I used all of the pieces to show how this is potentially a boat. Now, it might not be a boat. It could be it could just as reasonably be a skin stretcher for like tanning hides. It could just as reasonably
be a roof. It could be many things.
It could be many, many things. But honestly, I think it's a boat.
Well, and it's not necessarily...
And that's taking into account where it's found, the depth, the type of wood that's made from, et cetera, et cetera. I think it's a boat that somebody made. And then we have this tendency when we have a thing and we're spending hours and we're bored because we don't have cell phones yet, we start carving into things and making faces on it and making it look like other things.
Oh, that's like in Michigan. There's a salt mine that has all these beautiful carvings, and they tried to point out, well, look at these beautiful religious carving. It's because that was the prettiest thing they could find.
Well, and they tried claiming how old it was, like way older.
Oh, they
than
try to
were.
make it Amerindian. It's like, no, this is obvious. We based it off of these old church things because they were pretty.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a religious thing. It was just that's what they did.
And
it
was
pretty.
Bored.
Yeah, they were bored. You're stuck in the mines. It takes more time to go up than lunch break.
Right. You go for lunch break. Some people are leaving, so then you got to wait for the ones to come back. Some of them don't want to go for the hour trip back up to the surface, have their lunch, and an hour trip back down. So they just stay down in the mines, and then they get bored, and they started carving things out of the salt. Why? Because they could.
Well, it's like the Shigir idol. That doesn't disqualify the head imagery on the Shigir idol from actually depicting a spirit or a god or something.
Well, yeah.
Because we've done that a lot. The mermaids on the ships,
right, but at that point, the boat becomes
the main thing. Well, like
it becomes the idol, and we like you said, we do that today. Even I've seen fishing boats where people paint faces on it. They'll carve into it if there's wooden bits on it.
Well, we're an extremely pragmatic people. Unless we make something exclusively for decoration, like a park statue or something, or a mural.
And even then, most time, those are done for a purpose. Like, they serve a secondary purpose. They're not just pretty. It's a thing that does a thing that is also pretty.
Well, a memorial, for instance, has a secondary purpose.
Think about water fountains. Those are meant just to be pretty. But it's a water fountain. It is a functional thing. Just because they won't let you drink from it doesn't mean...
Well, you were supposed to originally. That's what water fountains are.
That's what they were originally for.
They were basically filtration systems. They weren't... filtration systems and places to get water. They didn't start out as just decorative.
I mean, you weren't supposed to wash your clothes in it, but you could go there and draw water from it. That was its purpose, is to draw water from.
Yeah, as an old school drinking fountain, basically.
Unlike how the Africans do these things when we go over there and we build the same things for them, they wash in the fountain as opposed to taking the water out of the fountain.
Well, what fountains basically are artificial springs, and then we just make them pretty. We usually put water spirits or heroes or whatever we like on them. And that's like even most of the sacred objects in history, the beautiful folk art people like, they're pragmatic. Like the Slavic, they have really pretty like distaffs and spindles.
Well, it's one of the things I love about our people is we make pretty things. We are extremely pragmatic. So the thing needs to do the thing. But who doesn't like to have the thing that everybody else has, but it's cooler? It does this extra thing that their things doesn't do, and it does it very well, or it's just designed to be pretty.
Well, whether it's we even do it today with the little bit we're able to, like the modern phenomenon of putting stickers on everything.
Yeah,
we're not allowed to carve the metal water bottle we buy, so we put a bunch of stickers on it. We're not allowed to replace the entire casing of our laptop with some home forged.
Well, it's not even allowed. It's if you try, you're going to break the damn thing.
Yeah, everything's too fragile. But whether it's boredom, pragmatism, or just to customize it, we have always made things really pretty.
Customize. That's a good way to do it. And sometimes it'll be spiritual things. Sometimes it's just something pretty. Sometimes it's it goes the full gambit.
Well, it's like you have a mead or a wine-making dish that the Greeks make. Who do they put on it? Dionysus.
And why? Because why not?
Well, I mean, it makes sense. There's many figures you can put on it, but God of Wine's kind of top of the list. Eventually, you get bored of that, and you switch to satyrs.
Or fish.
Or dolphins, or whatever works.
Right. Because there's some of those that have fish in them. Why? Because, well, if you're going to drink like a fish, you might as well have a fish in it. I mean, our jokes haven't really changed over the millennia. If you doubt me, go look at Hadrian's Wall and the cocks carved into it.
Yes.
The chalk giant.
Giant dick.
Yes. I mean, we haven't really changed at our core. Unfortunately, modernity has changed many of the expressions. It's twisted.
Well, it's like
it's twisted us, but in general, but still at our center, we are still the same thing. It's like you can take an oak tree, twist it around into a chair, but it's still an oak tree.
Well, and oddly enough, our people do actually do that.
Yes.
There's people that will grow trees specifically to form them into chairs. Oh, and that's actually a sacred thing we'll do is to make like a gate, like the fairy gates you talk about, where we twist trees into basically a gate shape. That sort of delineates a beautiful sacred space.
Right, and there's
do that.
Because twisting, well, you're talking about twisting nature, and that's horrible. We should never, ever do that. No. There's a difference between doing it to make something beautiful versus trying to simply control it. Like, there's people that will shape trees to make rakes. That I disagree with. I would rather much see these saplings twisted around to make a beautiful gate, to make something pretty, than to make something simply to force it to be something that it's not.
Well, and we'll actually help trees grow. We'll make advantage of tree hollows for altars, for tree houses, for things of that nature. Like the people that made fairy houses, which actually made the tree healthier because it reinforced all of the different openings.
All the rotten spots. They had to carve the rot out of it to get the window into it. Did we ever post that?
No, it might be something we post later on.
Yeah, so it might go up this week, or might find it on our Patreon. That'd be a good thing to do to get more people to support us. We'll start putting more stuff on Patreon. But yeah, what they did was they carved, the trees had natural hollows and rot spots in them, and these things are beautiful. And they carve out the rot and get down to the live wood, and then they insert a window, insert a door, and making fairy houses. And you can see that actually healed the tree because the tree begins to heal over top of, and you can see that these are natural holes that was just opened up, but the tree begins to heal because you can see where the rot was, bark is starting to grow over it. You can see where the window, where they put the window in, and the bark starting to seal up over the window, the door, and the wood actually growing back around it. So yeah, these things, sometimes they can be used to heal and make things better.
Well, and add magic.
Yeah, and add magic.
Because there's actually a documentary, I think it's mostly been removed, but it's called The Gnomist. And it's literally about this family that moves to an area, and they start putting up gnome houses in the forest as kind of just a thing. And it actually becomes so meaningful to people, they start leaving pieces of paper for the gnomes. And then the woman will come by, and she'll get all the papers. And one time, someone actually wrote that she used to bring, like, her daughter there, but then she died, young. So they actually took like the nickname that was written about the little girl, and they customized a gnome house as a memorial to the little girl.
Right. There's a reason why the state keeps trying to shut people down from doing this. It's not because people are destroying the trees. It's because we're putting magic back into the world where it can actually be seen.
Yeah, and that story did have a sad ending because the state made them take them all down.
See, I understand why people will say this, but honestly, it kind of offends me a little bit. Like, calling this an educational channel. I'm not bagging on the guy that said this because it's fair. It's a fair enough assessment. I mean, really, how do you quantify what it is that we do? We are teaching.
We're not really quantifiable. It's kind of like, it's why it's hard to explain what our Telegram is. Like, what are we?
Right. What are we?
Well, it's much like our people,
but
or our
another
spirituality.
thing is calling us just your pragmatic approach to paganism. Yes, it is pragmatic, but it is also extremely magical and spiritual. And if you don't notice that part of it, then you're not actually listening. Well, and again, it's not an insult. If you haven't noticed up to now, like you're like, oh, this is a very pragmatic and useful way to approach ethnic faith. Just perk up your ears, go back and listen to some of the stuff that we said before, and you will notice it is stuffed full of spirituality and magic and ritual and
Well, I've described it before on the podcast. We are kind of Occam's razor, the people. So we are extremely pragmatic. So how does the whole egg finding ritual make sense? Well, it also happens to be when food is scarce, because despite what people think, spring is not a time of plenty. It's actually a time of very little food.
It began as a pragmatic thing that we turned into a spiritual thing.
Well, and here's the thing is, if you understand it's a spiritual thing and you do it with intent, it loses power, because there is no Easter eggs that mean less than the people that understand this is a fertility ritual.
Right.
But the people that just do it because they like it, that's the magic.
Right. They do it for the kids. They do it just because they want to make something beautiful. Those are the ones that actually have more power than the ones that's doing it, I don't know, to invite in the fertility spirits or whatever weird thing is that they do. It's the ones that do it with that innocence. Well, they're giving. They're actually giving, and that's what puts the magic into it.
Well, it's like the maypole. People will be like, well, it's a phallic symbol. I'm like, maybe, but I'm not going to think about it that way.
Yeah.
I'm gonna just enjoy
I
the
mean,
maypole.
you can.
Or the May tree. Sometimes it's called the Maybaum, so the May tree. Oh, one of my favorites, just because this is actually a story, is the May tree is not the same everywhere. There's an area in Germany where the May tree tradition, the Maybaum or the maypole, it's specifically males. So like the young males, they'll like design a tree really pretty and stick it in the yard of the girl that they find that they have a crush on.
Right. Well, and I just noticed, because we was talking about this before the show, one of the ways that our shows work, we start out on topic. Then if you're listening, it sounds like we get off topic. And then we wrap it up by going back on the topic. But the thing is the middle part that seems like we're off topic is actually showing that all these things are interconnected.
Well, it's a lot
so we never actually get off topic.
No, it's a lot like storytelling, because like you look at our story system, you start out somewhere, and usually what happens is you go around in a circle and you end up back where it was. It's actually a really common trope even in modern media. Wherever you start, you might end up changed, but you're back where you started.
Yeah.
Like the Lord of the Rings, the Hobbits, story starts in the Shire. They go through all this stuff that has almost nothing to do with the Shire. Shire barely gets mentioned. Then, the end, they go back to the Shire.
Yes. So that's the way our podcasts work. And I was like, nah, we don't do that much. Oh, no, wait. Yes, we do.
We do it all the time.
and I don't notice it when I'm editing the podcast, because I'm aware that these things in the middle that we're talking about actually are still the things that we started off talking about. So I don't notice it, but I guess on the surface, yeah, it would appear that we meander and wander off topic, but we don't, because it's part of who we are. It is our storytelling method.
Well, it's actually one of the things I've tried to tell people is I don't mind that they make new stories, even if they don't get the lore perfectly right. Like, I don't mind Marvel Thor, like old school Marvel Thor on the comics. It's not accurate, but it's an earnest, respectful telling. Same with like the God of War games, like God of War 4 with Baldur and Freya. I didn't mind that at all. I actually liked how they depicted Baldur, because if Baldur can't be harmed, that also means he can't be touched, and that would eventually drive him mad.
Yeah.
So I actually liked that, because it took what little we have of Baldur and sort of fleshed him out as a character.
Well, and
they kind of shot the dog in the fifth one.
Right.
Many talking points, but whatever.
Grr. Well, and that's what I was going to get into is currently right now a lot of people will talk about how they're deconstructing this and they're deconstructing that, and they're deconstructing the characters in these universes and all these grand epic stories. They're not deconstructing them. They're shitting all over them.
Oh, yeah. Like
people are using the word incorrectly. I agree with Thanos from Endgame. Thanos was right. He was the hero of the story. Granted, he was going about it the wrong way. He didn't think long enough term. But that's besides the point. In those first movies up to Endgame, is that the one? Where he did the snap and he actually won?
Infinity War.
Up to Infinity War, Thanos was the hero. I have to deconstruct Thanos to explain why he's the hero. Now, what they're doing is not deconstruction. They're shitting on things.
Oh, yeah. They shit on Thanos in the Endgame.
Right. Well, because the deconstruction is just understanding. He did this thing. Why did he do this thing? So then you have to look at, basically pick apart the character to realize all the motivations and therefore the actions that was taken and the intentions of the actions. That's deconstruction, which is actually good. You want to try and understand your characters. But what they're doing with like Rings of Power, which is a hot topic right now, that is not deconstruction of the Lord of the Rings. That is shitting on Lord of the Rings. So they're not even making an effort to understand it.
Well, most of modern Marvel is shitting all over Marvel.
Yes.
And the only reason I'm talking about Marvel is because it's been really popular.
Right.
It's dying though, thankfully.
Well, most of the YouTube videos that you look up concerning stories, it's going to be Marvel, Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, and Wheel of Time. And the powers that be are not deconstructing these things, or The Boys is another really popular one. But they're not deconstructing these. They're shitting on them. And it really doesn't even have anything to do with the, what is that? That diversity quota thing. It's a something.
Whatever, it was a thing.
Yeah. This guideline that they have for diversity in shows. And this is evidenced in shows like Halo. They just shat all over it. There is plenty of room in the Halo universe for all of their diversity talking point shit. However, they intentionally just shat all over it, even though they could have still had all their diversity points. They would have just had to shift the story just a little bit, stuck to the canon, and they could have had all of their diversity. But that wasn't good enough. They have to shit all over it. Well, same way with all across the board. This is all they're doing. They're not deconstructing anything. They are shitting all over it.
Well, they're
telling bad stories.
Well, if you want to demoralize the people, you destroy their stories.
Yeah.
It's like in China. They're trying to keep their population under control. So they're telling stories. They're actually not doing a terrible job. They're actually going about it smarter than over here. But what they do is they do these stories way wrong. Like they will place it in some ancient mythic past and then not use their actual lore. Like I was watching an old Chinese movie, well, not an old Chinese movie, a new Chinese movie. And it's all epic and the Chinese are all cool and whatnot, but it's all bullshit. None of these creatures are actually in
Right, well,
Chinese
I
lore.
think I know what one you're talking about. It's where they have the dragon. To the Chinese, the dragon is the good guy. He is a god. And they used a Western evil dragon.
Yes, but looks like kind of like a halfway point between the two.
Right.
And then they made it not evil, but it was like a genetically engineered beast, and it was all nonsense. Like they had the lion dog, but it wasn't a lion dog. They just made it a giant Tibetan Mastiff. They're deliberately bastardizing their own lore for political ends to control people.
Right.
Because stories are powerful. They are magic.
Actually, all the peoples on the planet have stories. We just don't tell stories in the same way.
Well, even the Africans have stories.
Oh, yeah. They've told me some of their stories, and the way that they storytell is weird.
It's almost like they tell about the stories. It's like the synopsis.
Yes.
The
that's
synopsis / criticism, like a critic review / synopsis.
Yes.
It's like the reviews of our stories.
Honestly,
are
it's
their
the way
stories.
most pagans tell pagan stories now. They give you a synopsis of the story. They don't actually tell you the story.
And then try to deconstruct it.
Yeah.
What's the point?
Well, and by trying to deconstruct it, they end up not actually even deconstructing it. They just end up wiping their asshole all over it.
Well, it's like people bring up the esotericism of symbols. Symbols are not esoteric. By definition, they can't be. Because if they're esoteric, then they're not symbols anymore.
Yeah, then what's the purpose of the symbol?
Well, it's like the American flag is a symbol people have died for. Literally just the flag, not even what it represents, the flag. Same with many, many symbols over the years, whether it's a person embodying it like Joan of Arc or Boudica, or a literal symbol. And why? Because these things matter to people. They understood what it represented and what losing it would mean.
Right. Well, and part of my issue with esotericism is what has it ever actually accomplished?
Or built.
Or built, which we was actually talking about earlier today when we was exercising, is what has esotericism ever done for somebody and or built? No, building a house builds a house. Talking about the hidden meaning and secrets of the house does not get the house built.
Fucking your wife makes babies and pair bonds. But talking about the esotericism of fucking your wife doesn't do anything and probably makes both of you sexually frustrated.
Right. Really, it gets in the way of so many things. And I mean, just seriously think about it. What is the point of a secret hidden meaning behind a symbol? You make a symbol so that people know what the fuck you're talking about. Like an arrow.
Well, there are.
It means this way.
Well, it's like codes and cryptics. Those are not symbols. Those are codes and cryptics.
Yep.
And they're usually drawn in a symbol, but that's not what a symbol is. That's what a symbol typically looks like. Like, I can draw a lowercase t, and it's a crucifix, but it's also a lowercase t. I'm not drawing the Christian cross. There is a difference between something that looks like a symbol and what a symbol actually is. Because, like, secret societies are up the wazoo in esotericism and hidden bullshit. But they don't really truly have symbols, at least symbols used by the wider populace, because the people in the group tend to know what the symbols mean. That's why they're useful. It's like rebellions will have symbols they use, but they're only useful because the people in the rebellion know what that symbol looks like.
Exactly. All the stuff, it's quite simply, it's nonsense. Oh, there we lost another 10%.
Well, it's like Ogham or runes. People treat these like they're esoteric. No, they're only esoteric now because we don't use them. If in a parallel universe we'd lost the Latin alphabet instead and then rediscovered them on like these old Greco-Roman carvings, there'd be...
Well, there actually is a magic system built up around the Latin alphabet. The monks did it.
Oh, yeah. And here's the thing is all esotericism is symbolism. It's the equivalent of saying, we invented a great game, but we're not going to tell you about it.
So what good does that do? It's just not a thing.
Secret societies are when rich people get
So then
bored.
our stories don't have secret hidden meanings to them. And if they do, they're not good stories, because I've seen some of those stories that have the secret hidden meaning. And they're just not good stories. They're horrible stories. They're bad. I mean, they're just bad. They're not good stories.
Well, it's like J.R.R. Tolkien had that quote. It was something on allegory. I have it somewhere. Here it is. This is from Tolkien himself. I cordially dislike allegory in all its manifestations and always have done so since I grew old and wary enough to detect its presence. I much prefer history, true or feigned, with its varied applicability to the thought and experience of readers. I think that many confuse applicability with allegory, but the one resides in the freedom of the reader and the other in the purpose domination of the author.
Allegory is a story, poem, or picture that can be interpreted to reveal a hidden meaning, typically or a moral or political one. So allegory is on the onus of the reader. You can look at anything, because that's why they attack Tolkien over that quote. Well, then why is there so much allegory in the stories? There is no allegory in the story. It is history, real or feigned, written to the purpose of entertaining, so on and so forth. Wasn't he a history
professor? English professor. But he used all this lore to craft an entire world. He wrote...
There is no hidden meaning to it. He put it all out there for everybody.
He wrote millennia of history with the intention of people actually continuing his stories, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
So he was a historian and a study of English, and basically wrote a story with the intention. It's much like Lovecraft.
Mm-hmm.
Lovecraft encouraged people to continue his stories.
Right. So this allegory that people see in there, it is the fault of that reader seeing allegory. Allegory was not intentionally put into his stories, like the hidden meaning. What does the orcs mean? Oh my goodness. The orcs are orcs.
The elves are elves.
The elves are elves. The dwarves are dwarves, so on and so forth, et cetera, et cetera. It is exactly what it says. Any hidden meanings to it is because the reader is looking for hidden meanings. And if you look hard enough for hidden meaning, you will find it in anything. Like, why is it 2:41 right now at this very moment? Because it is. That's the reality of it. But if I really want to look into some hidden esoteric or allegorical meaning to it, I can find it. My mind doesn't work that way, but I could really press and find it. Yeah. So he disliked allegory. He intentionally wrote to not put allegory into the stories. So there is no allegory. If it's there, it's completely accidental, and most likely it's on the onus of the reader putting it there.
Well, and here's the thing is, our myths and our stories, they can be interpreted many ways,
mm-hmm.
but they're not hidden meaning. It's like Red Riding Hood. That's a popular story. You can interpret what it's supposed to say many ways.
Right, but in the end, it's on you as the listener, the reader, what it is that you're taking away from it. The story of Little Red Riding Hood is quite simply
the story of Little Red Riding Hood.
Yes. There is no secret meanings. I mean, you might really like a certain aspect and it talks to you in this way, but that's on you.
Well,
it's like, not on the story.
Well, it's like, what's the secret meaning of the Tiwaz rune?
That way.
Or the letter T. Ta.
Yeah.
It's just how stories. It's how stories work. You don't intentionally write a story with hidden meaning because then,
and if you do, it's going to fail.
It's terrible. You write a story because you want to tell a story. That's what happened.
You know what? You know what authors intentionally put allegory into their stories? Yeah, me either, because they never write popular stories.
Nobody likes the fantasy books that are full of allegory.
Yeah,
they just think they have one that's full of allegory.
I mean, the author loves it, and they get angry because nobody likes their story because it's stupid because it's full of allegory.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, quite simply.
Well, and here's the thing is there's nothing wrong with newer stories. Like Joan of Arc. Joan of Arc is a newer myth. And actually, she was heading to godhood. She hit it, and then the church ripped her down to sainthood and kind of demoted her and sort of stuck her in this quagmire of saintdom.
Mm-hmm. Well, and here's how good allegory works. One of the most popular movies in our various circles, Starship Troopers. The director intentionally put allegory into it. The audience ignored all of his allegory and was like, yeah, we need this. We need more of this. We need people that meritocracy, do or die. It's not... You're not politically voted in and then can do a shitty job. No, you have to actually be able to do the job. Meritocracy, that's what we need. More gung-ho, go get them. Sacrifice for the people and et cetera, et cetera. All the good stuff that people take from. The director did not mean it that way. He made it full of allegory and nobody gave a fuck.
Well, that's part of actually the problem with a lot of modern shows is they try to get the message through.
Yeah, well, that's why they stopped using allegory, and like American Gods, it was very popular, and then they stopped telling the story, and they started giving a message, and then people stopped watching it, and then the actors and the writers and the directors got mad and lashed out at the audience that stopped liking the story because
it wasn't a story anymore.
Yeah, they was just preaching at everybody and telling them that they're bad people.
Well, the way like Christians tell stories with their sermons, that's preaching. Nobody likes to be preached at. Nobody likes to be preached at. I don't like it. You don't like it. I've never met anybody that's like, yeah, preaching. I love it.
Yes,
it's
tell me how I'm bad and stupid.
I'll go to the preacher and I'll just sit there with my popcorn and enjoy it for 25 hours on end.
Because I love it.
8 days a week. Nobody does that.
No.
You tell a story, however, people are down for it.
Yeah, if you tell a good story. And other than that, people can be socially pressured into saying a story is good. I mean, look at...
Well, that's the entirety of modern media.
Yes.
It's like nobody goes see a film, but it's the bestest ever because it's got the right diversity quote. Nobody's doing stories anymore, and they don't know how to do it. Like The Boys. It's a terrible show. It
has all the promise in the world.
But like the most recent season... It was terrible. Like, they tried to set up this character, Soldier Boy, as the bad guy for the entire season, and by the end, a lot of the fan base was like, no, he's the closest thing to a good guy in this shithole of a season.
Yeah, because he's the only one keeping his word.
He's being honest. He's consistent. And the rest of the characters are nonsensical. It's like they have this whole scene where it's like, you're just another racist we can't get rid of to Soldier Boy. I'm like, he hasn't done anything racist the entire season.
And they've given up on allegory because we have a tendency to ignore it.
So then they just started preaching.
Yeah.
And that goes over about as well as a molasses bath.
Mm-hmm. And again, people can be pressured into saying a story is good. That one crappy Star Wars movie. Okay.
The Last Jedi.
There's too many of them. Sorry. That one Star Wars movie.
Back when it was the one shitty Star Wars.
Yeah, back when it was the one, and almost everybody, the minority was saying, "No, this movie sucked," and here's the 50,000 reasons why this story sucked. Because from beginning to end, they couldn't follow the canon. But a lot of the population was like, "Oh no, this is the fantastic most fantastical possible Star Wars movie of all time. It spoke to me in my heart when they was flipping around the Star Wars sword, and nobody meant it. They was pressured into saying it.
Well, yeah, I saw this firsthand because, like, I went to see the movie with some family members. They all hated it. We were ranting in the car on the way home about how bad it was.
Until they went to work.
And then I think it was my dad. I was talking to him about how bad it was later on, just for fun. And then he said, "Oh, no, I like it now." And then I asked him, wait, when did you start to like it? You hated it as much as I did. What part do you like about it? He literally sat there with like a dead look in his eye for like 2 minutes.
Power down. Ooh.
And then decided randomly the scene in the throne room, which was hilarious because that was one of the scenes we specifically ripped on the car ride home.
Mm-hmm.
He changed his
because
opinion.
the armor works when it needs to work, but it doesn't work when they need it to not work.
Well, that's not even what I got into. I got into just how stupid it was.
Yeah.
And then
there's so much to hate on that movie.
It's a terrible example of storytelling. The original Star Wars.
I actually feel bad for Daisy Ridley because here's the thing. A lot of these actors, when they're making a movie, they have no idea what
they just know they're on untitled Star Wars project.
Right. That's it. They don't know actually because it's not recorded in order. Half time they don't get the scripts until that day. So on and so forth, and it's only for that scene. So they have no idea really what they're making. They have a rough idea. But then it's a new movie to them when they go and watch it because if you've seen anybody re-edit, like The Hobbit, there was a guy re-edited the 3 Hobbit movies down into one movie that was mostly watchable. Yeah, so the editing room can really change things from what you think it is. And she cried. She was crying. She couldn't even do the interview. She's like, I just got to go to my car and cry. She wanted to do a good movie. She probably thought she was doing a good movie.
Well, it's Star Wars. It's like, I think some of the people that signed on to Lord of the Rings, like the girl that plays Galadriel. I mean, I don't know anything about her personally. She might be a horrible person, but she might also be a very nice person. But if you were a little girl and you grew up and you found out that you could audition for the role of Galadriel after growing up with the Lord of the Rings movies.
Mm-hmm. And they didn't do anything that shows that they're going to fuck the story.
Yeah. So the first thing you'd think is, oh my gosh, Mom, Dad, I get to play Galadriel. How excited would you be? And then you're just locked into a contract. What do you do?
Well, and let's say they give you the best material. But then when they edit the film, they edit it out of what you thought that meant, or even what the original source material said that this thing meant. And then it turns into something that is morally against what it is that you believe. What are you supposed to do about it?
Well, it's part of the problem with the movie industry in general as a mode of storytelling. It can be extremely powerful because it's all immersive, but it's also extremely problematic because of the simple fact that it is all immersive and because the same movie can be edited 2 different ways. It's why the director's cut became a thing, is because you can completely change the intention
as a matter of fact,
director.
that director's cut saved some movies because the theatrical release sucked and people was like, no, this sucks. And then you get the DVD, the director's cut. And then you get these extra scenes, and some of the scenes are reordered, and you're like, it was actually a good movie, just the theatrical version of it sucked.
Well, and it's one of the overall problems with storytelling in the modern day is all the methods of storytelling have been co-opted, which is why it's a good thing that there's new people coming out with ways of telling stories.
Which is why it irritates me. I mean, it's not the people's fault. So when you watch Vikings, the Vikings TV show, for instance, which was wildly popular for a while, and people were taking that as history. They was learning their history. They was learning about Ragnar. They was learning about Queen what's-her-face. Because I can never remember her name. In the lore, she's the one that approached Ragnar with eating the apple, wearing the net.
Auslog. She's actually really interesting.
Yeah,
in the
she's
myths.
actually a really great character. She's not the complete cunt.
Well, they made her a Cersei ripoff in the show.
But people aren't doing it wrong, and they're actually doing the natural thing when they watch this, and they're like, yes, this is the story. This is how it was. Hollywood is pervert. This is why you can't do it, is because they know our people learn this way, that they understand our people, and they know that our people are going to run with this. That's why they put the Chinese lady in there. That's why they put the Muslim kid in there.
That's why they keep rewriting history.
Yes.
Like they'll do period pieces and completely warp it.
Mm-hmm.
It's because that's how our people learn. Like we said it at the beginning. Our people learn history, customs, culture, religion, spirituality. Right. That's why most white Christians don't know the first thing about the Bible, but they'll talk to you because of the film It's a Wonderful Life, that the stars are angels, and when a bell rings, an angel gets its wings. That's completely heretical. It's not real.
Yeah, but or what was that other incredibly popular Christian show? It was Left Behind.
Yeah, the Rapture one.
Yeah, and there's it has almost nothing at all to do with anything that's in their book. But they talk about it as if this is the way that it is. And no, that's the way that movie is. Well, this is why I don't watch pagan content. If it's a show that is obviously intended to be oriented towards pagans to watch, I refuse to watch it because it is just so fucked. And I know enough history. I know enough.
Well, and it's
lore.
pretty obvious that it's been done on purpose. Like people have, like we brought up the sexy dirt. Midsommar, yeah.
That's one of them. They took just a little bit of something that is actually a thing and then twisted it and warped it to turn it into something that's not. And then we have some of our people that are trying to return to ethnic faith. They watch this with the understanding that this is a pagan thing that they're watching. And then they think this is actually the way that it is. No, this is the way that the church describes it to turn us into fucking monsters.
Or there's another one, The Wicker Man.
Yes.
Or a few others. Like, other people have noticed this as well. Like, they will deliberately film historical films like it's really dark out and always cloudy. They'll make the people as monstrous as possible, make all the clothes drab,
ill-fitting. The people are dirty.
Well, there's even a film, I think it's called The Viking. Mm-hmm. It's literally the pagans are presented as horrific, moronic, corrupt, human-sacrificing monsters. Mm-hmm. And the Christians are just these nice people. And the film literally ends with the pagans gleefully running into the river to be baptized and be welcomed into the bosom of Christ.
So they do these things for a reason. We should be able to learn history. We should be able to learn cultures. We should be able to... We should be able to watch the movies, the TV shows, listen to the stories, listen to the music, and be like, yes, this is what it is. But currently we can't. Well, I mean, we're hoping eventually we can make the money to where we can fix this. And people can actually learn it from watching, just watching and engaging with a story that we tell. Because we would like to actually eventually, hopefully, start making enough money that we can start producing films and whatnot. We're miles from that, so no, we're not secretly working on it. But we would like to get there.
Well, and stories can inspire people to do great things, like Shakespeare's plays have inspired innumerable works of art. Wagner's operas, which honestly as operas they're subpar, but stylistically they carry a lot of power because of their subject matter and because of the method in which they're performed. An entire art movement, an entire cultural movement basically spawned from Wagner. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people learned their mythology from that. It's not right. He gets a lot of the mythology either wrong because he chose to do it a different way or because he was strapped for, why have both of these roles cast? I can jam them into one role, and then you have Idun and Freya and the same goddess just to fulfill the same role. Mm-hmm. But these stories, they make us stronger. They can motivate us to just grand heights, like Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings, the films inspired so many people. Mm-hmm. And our people are trying to get back to who we were instinctively. That's why, there's so many things that are good for our people that have been corrupted. Like healthier local food. There's nothing wrong with that. But it's been so corrupted, the association is negative, et cetera, et cetera. I'll end with a little bit more the ending of talking to the coworker, because I think it's actually important and it hammers home some of these things.
Yeah, so a lot of people turn off now. Don't turn off yet. Wait until I start talking.
Yeah. But I'm talking to him and I'm telling him, thing is you don't have to believe in the gods. But telling their stories not only shows them we care, but it allows us to be better. It's like if you have a grandfather that fought in World War II or something like that, and he did great deeds, and you told his legends and his stories, and you did that to show you care, to tell your family how great your ancestors were, what they were capable of. A man tells his stories so many times that he becomes the stories. And in that way, he becomes immortal. And the thing that most hit me was after I said that, he said, wow, I have a new goal in life.
Which is perfect. All right, now the people that like to click off early, thanks for showing up. For the people that like to listen right to the end, it's going to be really short. I'm just going to say, don't do what your enemy describes you as doing, because they intentionally try to make you a monster. So stop and think. You argue with the TV screens. Argue with the book that you're reading. That way you're engaging with the storytelling, and learn how to tell a story and tell it from your heart. Don't try to impress the academic side of somebody, because that doesn't really impress anybody. The sincerity. Be sincere in everything that you do, and you will actually make the world a better place, at least immediately around you. It can inspire other people to do the same. It's like a ripple in a pond. So until then, guys, we'll see you next week at some point. All right, be good.